I knew right away that something was wrong when I stepped into that steakhouse. It wasn't because of the way my father looked at me, like he was about to give a eulogy. It was because Lauren was already there, swirling a glass of wine as if she owned the place. She was never on time, never calm, and always a disaster of failed businesses and self-centered social media antics. But tonight, she seemed confident and content, as if she had already won. The waiter had just poured my drink when my father leaned forward and delivered the news. "I'm retiring," he said, his voice steady and deliberate. "Lauren will be taking over as CEO." For a moment, I just stared at him. I wasn't surprised. I had stopped expecting fairness from him a long time ago. I was just waiting to see if he would show any sign of weakness. Small twitch, a tiny crack in his perfect facade when he realized the magnitude of what he had done. It never happened. "You're talented," he continued, as if that mattered. As if I hadn't just spent the last 3 months saving his failing company. But true leadership requires something more. Lauren took a slow sip of her wine, letting the silence hang in the air before finally looking at me. "You should be proud, though," she said, with fake sympathy dripping from every word. "I mean, Dad's right. Not everyone is cut out to lead." That's when he slid an envelope across the table. $20,000, he said, "for your time." And that's when I smiled. Not because I was okay with it, or because I was about to give up and let them celebrate their cleverness. No, I smiled because they thought they had won. I pocketed the cash without a word, picked up my drink, and raised it in a toast to them. I wanted them to think I had accepted my fate and to let them enjoy their little victory. Then I got to work. By the next morning, everything would be different. I didn't go home that night. I didn't mope it, get angry, or even call the few board members I knew were on my side. That would have been too predictable. It was what they expected, me sulking and throwing a fit before disappearing like a defeated animal. Instead, I went to my office, the one I had earned, the one I had made relevant, again while my father sat in his corner office pretending the world hadn't changed. The security guards just nodded at me. No questions asked. He knew who had been running the company for the last 3 months. Everyone did. Everyone except my father. I poured myself a drink and made a single phone call. "Is the offer still on the table?" I asked. That the man on the other end didn't hesitate. "For you, always." We met in the early hours in a place where people with a lot of money talk about things that never make the news. I didn't need to explain the situation. He already knew. In our industry, news travels fast, especially when it reeks of betrayal. "Let me guess," he said, leaning back in his chair. "He gave you a check, patted you on the head, and told you to be a good boy." "Close," I said. "Cash. 20 grand. He laughed. A deep, genuine laugh. Christ, that's almost insulting." "It's not almost," I said. "It is insulting." He studied me for a long moment. "So, what do you want?" That was the real question, wasn't it? I could walk away and let my father ruin his own company under Lauren's incompetent leadership. Or I could take what should have been mine. I chose the latter. "I want control," I said. "I want all of it." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then let's make it happen." By the time I left, the plan was already in motion. Phone calls were being made. The right people were being convinced, pressured, or bought. By the time my father and Lauren walked into the office the next morning, they didn't know it yet, but they were already done. By the time I arrived at the office the next morning, the atmosphere was already different. The receptionist at the front desk, who usually greeted me with a hesitant good morning while under my father's watchful eye, was standing a little taller. The employees I passed didn't make their usual polite small talk. They were watching, waiting. They felt the change. But my father and Lauren still thought they were on top of the world. I stepped into the boardroom just as they were sitting down. My father was at the head of the table, and Lauren was smugly adjusting the new CEO nameplate in front of her. She had her phone in her hand, probably about to post some meaningless corporate girl boss nonsense about breaking barriers while running a company she had no right to lead. Then she saw me, and for the first time, that self-satisfied smirk faltered. "What the hell are you doing here?" she snapped. I pulled out a chair, calmly adjusted my cuffs, and met her glare with an easy smile, taking what's mine. Before she could respond, the door opened again, and that's when my father's expression finally cracked. The man who walked in was someone my father never wanted to see across a negotiation table, let alone in his own boardroom. My silent partner, the one I had met the night before, James Lancaster, the biggest private equity shark in the industry. He was a man who didn't just buy companies, he consumed them, dismantled them, and rebuilt them in his own image. My father's face went pale. He finally understood. The boardroom quickly filled after that. Investors and board members came in, some looking confused, others as if they had been expecting this because I leaned back, waiting and watching as the last few people took their seats. Then I pulled out a folder, slid it across the table to my father, and spoke in the same calm, controlled tone he had used on me the night before. "There's been a change in leadership." Lauren grabbed the folder first, opening it with the same arrogance she had shown at dinner. Then she saw it, the signatures, the terms, the finalized buyout. She gasped, jumping up from her chair. "This is a joke." "No," I said. "This is business." My father's hands clenched into fists as he quickly read the papers. He knew contracts better than anyone and knew exactly what he was looking at. A hostile takeover. I had partnered with Lancaster using my connections, my leverage, and most importantly, the investors' doubts about Lauren's ability to lead. I had let them know what would happen to their money under her rule, showing them in clear. Brutal financial projections, how fast she would run the company into the ground. And then, when they were already second-guessing everything, Lancaster made them an offer a way out, a way forward. All they had to do was sign, and they had one by one until the company was mine. I folded my hands on the table. "You taught me? Well, Dad," I said, my voice calm. "You even told me leadership takes something more." "You were right." His face was unreadable. Then he exhaled slowly and closed the folder with a sharp snap. "So," he said, his voice like gravel, "what happens now?" I smiled. "Now," I said, standing up, "you're both fired." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room, the kind that only occurs when power changes hands in an instant. The boardroom, once my father's domain, was now my territory. Lauren made the first move, of course. She shoved her chair back so hard it scraped against the floor, her face twisted in disbelief. You can't do this. She spat, jabbing a manicured finger at me. Dad, say something. But my father just sat there, his fingers interlocked and his jaw tight. It wasn't because he didn't want to fight, but because he knew it was over. I turned to her, my voice calm, almost amused. I can. And I did. Lauren's eyes darted to the board members. You. She pointed at one, then another. You all supported this. You let him pull this stunt after everything I was promised. The board members didn't say a word because they had supported it. They had seen what I had done in 3 months versus what she would do in a lifetime. She turned back to my father, desperation now in her voice. Dad, fix this. He still didn't speak, and that's when I saw Ida flicker of something in his eyes, not just anger, not just loss, but realization. For the first time in his life, my father was not in control, and he hated it. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. You thought I was just an employee, I said slowly and deliberately. You thought I'd always be in the trenches while you sat up here playing king. I gestured to the room, to the polished mahogany table and the view of the city Skylander Company. I had just taken. You were wrong. Finally, my father exhaled slowly and sharply. Then he stood up and adjusted his cuffs. When he finally looked at me, it wasn't as his son. It was as his successor. You think this is a victory? He said, his voice laced with something dark. You'll learn one day. You'll learn. I just smiled. Maybe, but today isn't that day. Lauren let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. You're going to regret this, she hissed, her eyes flashing. I doubt it, I said. Then I motioned to the 2 security guards already waiting by the door. Escort them out. Lauren shouted something shrill and ugly, but I didn't hear it. I didn't need to. At that moment, as the doors swung open and my father and sister were let out of the company I had rebuilt, I had already won. But the game wasn't over yet. The moment the doors closed behind them, the room seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Conversations that had been held in check by the tension burst into low, cautious murmurs. The board members exchanged glances, processing the coup they had just witnessed. Some looked relieved, others wary, and Lancaster just smirked with the kind of grin that comes from watching a student finally surpass his teacher. You handled that well, he said, breaking the silence. But now comes the real fight. I knew what he meant. Taking the company had been one thing. Keeping it would be a completely different war. I sat back down, lightly tapping my fing.